It is my pleasure to introduce Judge Mike Heavey. He grew up in the Montlake neighborhood of Seattle and graduated from Garfield High School in 1965. He volunteered for the U.S. Army in 1967, served as an officer in Vietnam with the 1st Cavalry Division, was awarded the Bronze Star and Air Medal. He was first elected to the Washington State Legislature in 1986, where he served for 14 years. He was appointed to the King County Superior Court by Governor Gary Locke in 2000. He climbed Mount Rainier for the first time at age 59, the 5th time at age 64 in 2011. He is married and has 3 adult children and 2 grandchildren. In 2007, a high school classmate of his daughter was arrested in Italy for murder and rape. Her name was Amanda Knox. Judge Heavey saw she was innocent and became involved. Out of the Amanda Knox case came his interest in wrongful convictions. His talk today is entitled Pathology of a Wrongful Conviction. Please welcome Judge Michael Heavey.
Susan, thank you so much for your kind introduction. And thank you, Rabbi Weiner, for having me here today. And a very special thank you to Rabbi Kate Spicer. She's an amazing leader, amazing organizer. I love the name Endless Opportunities. It connotes to me the opportunity to serve others never ends. Now, no one person or organization is ever responsible for getting an innocent person out of prison. It takes a team effort, a bucket brigade. We have here and via Zoom some key members of our Judges for Justice Bucket Brigade, and I'd like to recognize them. Retired judges Jay White, Carol Shapira, and Diane Woolard. From Hawaii, our media coordinator, Jeremy Miller, our case manager, Beverly Brooks. From Virginia, we should have Barry Heyman, who's an awesome investigator. Judges for Justice has been around for 9.5 years. We've learned a little about wrongful convictions, and we'd like to share some of that with you today. A wrongful conviction is the death of justice in a particular incident, crime, case. It's a two-sided coin. On one side, normally the good guys, law enforcement, become the bad guys and destroy an innocent person's life. On the other side, law enforcement shuts down and a killer remains at large, unpursued, free to kill again. A wrongful conviction, the death of justice, is the result of a disease process. A pathologist may conduct an autopsy to determine the cause of death. So for the next hour, please think of me as a pathologist who has examined several injustices. I will discuss why wrongful convictions happen. Once you get to the root causes of the disease process, you are better informed as to how to help rectify the miscarriage of justice. We'll talk briefly about the Amanda Knox case, and we will discuss our cases in Idaho, Hawaii, and Pennsylvania. That's a picture of Junior Safety Patrol in Montlake Elementary in 1959. Up front was Tom Dreiling and me. We both ended up becoming lawyers. Many of my friends and classmates attended Temple De Hirsch, took Hebrew lessons here, and were confirmed here. To me, Temple De Hirsch has been a long and much revered Seattle institution. It is a distinct honor for me to make a presentation here today. On TV, back in 1959, we watched Leave It to Beaver, the Cisco Kid. At 12 noon every Wednesday, there was an air raid siren. Class started each day with the Pledge of Allegiance. And as you all know, it ended with the words, "One nation, under God, with liberty and justice for all." At 5 p.m., we watched Superman.
Faster than a speeding bullet. More powerful than a locomotive. Able to leap tall buildings at a single bound. Look, up in the sky, it's a bird.
It's a plane!
It's Superman! Fights a never-ending battle for truth, justice, and the American way.
Now, I still believe in truth, justice, and the American way. This is the front page of the Seattle Times on March 28, 2015. Italy's highest court had just overturned the murder conviction of Amanda Knox and her co-defendant Raphael Sollecito. Note the second headline that I have yellow highlighted. It says Amanda Knox saga ends in exoneration. Now, Italy has 3 possible verdicts in a criminal case: guilty and not guilty, like we do. But they also have a third: innocent. They did not commit the crime. Italy's court, highest court, had just found Amanda and Raphael innocent. They did not commit the crime. My daughter was a classmate of Amanda's at Seattle Prep High School on the north end of Capitol Hill. They carpooled together for 4 years. And I thought when Amanda was first arrested in 2007, I thought she must be one of those mean girls I've heard about, right? And in the spring of 2008, I asked my daughter, "What do you think of Amanda Knox?" Her answer surprised me. She said, "Amanda is the most genuinely kind person I know. She doesn't have a mean bone in her body." And that caused a great disconnect in my mind. So I volunteered to help her family, and I got involved. That is how it sparked my interest in wrongful convictions. The saddest part of the whole saga to me is the defamation Amanda experienced. There are still people, probably millions around the world, believe she killed her good friend and roommate, Meredith Kircher. And there's still people, even if they think, "Oh yeah, well maybe she didn't," who think she's a bad person, who think ill of her. I can tell you, if you have any negative thoughts about Amanda, you are wrong. Your thoughts are probably a hangover of a negative media account that you heard that was most likely based upon lies. She is one of the most loving, creative, and responsible people I have met. She is, like my daughter said in 2008, one of the most genuinely kind person my daughter knew, and didn't have a mean bone in her body. In 2013, in relation to the case, I was on the Piers Morgan CNN show with Raphael, her co-defendant, and his attorney, a guy named John Q. Kelly. An interesting thing about John Q. Kelly is that in the late 90s, he was one of the 2 attorneys that got a civil judgment against O.J. Simpson for the in amount of about $34 million for the murder of Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson. On CNN in 2013, I explained that Rudy Guede was the sole killer of Meredith Kircher.
Judge Heavey, you've always been a strong supporter of Amanda Knox's. It's a very divisive case. Many people have strong opinions on both sides of this. Why do you feel so strongly, with your exemplary legal background, that she is 100% innocent?
Mr. Morgan, 5 years ago, October of 2008, less than a year after the murder of Meredith Kircher, Rudy Guede, overwhelming evidence, Meredith's blood,
his palm print. DNA all over her body and on her clothes. Admits to being there. Was convicted and sentenced to 30 years in prison, later reduced on appeal. He is the sole killer.
These are images of innocent men, famous wrongful convictions, Norfolk 4, Central Park 5, Chris Tapp in Idaho, Frank Pauline, Sean, and Albert Schweitzer in Hawaii. Each of them was convicted of a brutal crime and rape, even though they did not match the semen DNA from the crime. You might ask, how do police officers, prosecutors, and juries reject the powerful evidence of DNA? In wrongful convictions, there are deep subconscious psychological factors playing out. It seems that the more deviant and shocking the underlying crime, the more likely there's going to be a wrongful conviction. Two men get in a bar fight, one kills the other, say in the Rainier Valley. The killer comes up in front of a judge of King County Superior Court. Families of both the victim and friends of the victim and the killer are in the court. Everybody's crying. We're losing one person to prison for 20 years and one person is dead. It's tragic, but it doesn't affect the rest of the community. Shocking crimes are a little bit different from that. Follow that progression. Shocking crime creates fear in the community. The fear puts pressure on the police to solve it. This makes police susceptible to tunnel vision and its perverse byproduct of noble cause corruption. In the 1990s, Canada had 3 egregious wrongful convictions come to light. They not only harmed the innocent person, but also it harmed law enforcement. When a wrongful conviction is exposed, it results in a loss of public confidence in the police and prosecutors. Canada's Department of Justice deemed the loss of confidence to be unacceptable. They decided we're going to figure out why these happen and how to prevent them. So they published their report in 2004, and this is a major finding. A leading cause of wrongful convictions in Canada and other countries is tunnel vision and its perverse byproduct of noble cause corruption. The source of tunnel vision and its perverse byproduct of noble cause corruption is fear. Fear can be caused by a shocking crime. No American can forget September 11, 2001. This shocking crime, this brutal murder of almost 3,000 innocent Americans, created fear. The fear put pressure on the government to do something, solve the problem. Despite no evidence of Iraq involvement in the 9/11 attacks, the U.S. invaded Iraq a year and a half later in March of 2003. Now we're told that tunnel vision has a perverse byproduct of noble cause corruption. Colin Powell, our Secretary of the State at the time, told the United Nations that, and the world that there was evidence of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Turned out he was wrong. Colin Powell, I saw an interview of him. One of our most distinguished Americans regretted more than anything else that had happened in his life that he told the United Nations that there were weapons of mass destruction. Proof that even the best among us can fall prey to tunnel vision and noble cause corruption. So no one likes the pang of fear. It makes us uncomfortable. We want it to go away. When our fear comes from a deviant crime, we want our police to solve the crime, find the killer, make our communities safe. When the media reports that the police are making little or no progress, there's pressure on law enforcement for results. The fear and pressure for results make police and prosecutors, and eventually all of us, susceptible to tunnel vision. Here's that same picture we saw earlier. Each of these wrongful convictions, the DNA of the man didn't match the male DNA left at the crime. Why do human beings reject powerful and probative evidence and instead accept schlock, trash? The answer is the psychological subconscious force called tunnel vision. Tunnel vision is not as simple as it sounds. At least it wasn't for me. It is also called confirmation bias. When human beings have a problem, they come to a solution, an answer, and they form subconsciously a bias for their answer, for their solution. They search for evidence, no matter how flimsy, that confirms their bias, confirmation bias. Example, the car you're driving. You once had a transportation problem, you bought your car. You now see your answer, your solution everywhere you drive, make, model, and color. It's subconscious, we don't even realize we're doing it. Now that's a very benign form of tunnel vision. But when there is a shocking crime and our focus lands on a suspect, the tunnel vision becomes absolutely blinding. So the Canada report says tunnel vision. This is from a group of law enforcement people. It says tunnel vision has a perverse byproduct, that's not good, of noble cause corruption. Strong words. We don't like to think of our police as perverse or corrupt. And 99% of the time, they're not. Behind the scenes in a wrongful conviction is an alpha dog investigator, detective, inspector. Take charge. He or she doesn't trust judges and juries to get it right. He's knowledgeable about crimes and he knows what the prosecutor is looking for. And he sees himself as a knight in shining armor on a noble cause. His noble cause is to get the bad guy locked up and make the community safe. And he's just the guy to do it. He has the attitude of the end justifies the means. His tunnel vision tells him the suspect is the killer and he's going to do everything in his power to convict the SOB, even if he bends a few rules. So how does our investigator get a conviction with little or no credible evidence? He uses what we call the power tools of noble cause corruption. The power tools of noble cause corruption are coerced confession, inflammatory media, unreliable, incentivized witnesses, ignore or manipulate forensics, and official misconduct. If you look at Amanda's case, all 5. You look at our Idaho case, all 5. Hawaii case has 4 of the 5, and the Pennsylvania case has 4 of the 5. Let's look at what our Idaho case was all about. On January 25th, 2013, I met in Idaho Falls, Idaho. It's about a 12-hour drive from Seattle, with the attorney for Chris Tapp. That's a mugshot of him right there. At the same meeting was the mother of the victim. The victim was Angie Dodge. Her mother is Carol Dodge. Angie Dodge was murdered in the early morning hours of June 13th, 1996. It's gut-wrenching. She was stabbed 14 times in her sleep, partially disrobed, male DNA was present. Shocking. 7 months after the crime, a friend of Angie's, the pressure was building on the police after 7 months. a friend of Angie's, Ben Hobbs, is arrested in Nevada for rape. He had used a knife to coerce his victim. Good suspect. At this point, the tunnel vision set in. No matter what the evidence would show, Ben Hobbs killed Angie Dodge. Chris Tapp was a friend of Ben Hobbs, and he was brought in for questioning. 3.5 weeks later, after 9 interrogations, Tapp confessed to stabbing Angie Dodge and participating in the murder. Tapp is charged with rape and murder, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison with the opportunity for parole after 30 years. There were a number of red flags to us when we first started the case. Tapp had confessed to the crime, but he had 6 different confessions, 6 different stories. The first, I don't know anything, I'd like to help you guys out. The 6th one, almost in a stupor, he says, I stabbed her because the other guys threatened to kill me unless I did. Why did he change his story 5 separate times? Tapp also didn't know key details of the crime, where Angie lived, the distinctive clothes that she was sleeping in, couldn't name the 3rd man present with him and Hobbs, who theoretically left the DNA. And of course, the DNA didn't match Hobbs or Tapp. And FBI profiling, who has studied or investigated literally thousands of crimes like this, said it's always a single perpetrator, not 3 guys. The killer most likely lived close to Angie, and it's a peeping Tom who's been watching her, and he may have known her. So we investigated, we got involved. And we saw right away that the tunnel vision of Ben Hobbs, that Ben Hobbs was the killer, and they were going to use Chris Tapp at first just to get Ben Hobbs. And to do that, they used all the power tools: coerced confession, inflammatory media, dubious witnesses. They ignored the forensic science, and they engaged in official misconduct. After looking at Tapp's 6 separate stories, we eventually saw, prior to each change of story, Tapp was given a polygraph examination. And it was in that polygraph, those polygraph exams, that the police coerced Tapp. The police told Chris Tapp, a very gullible 20-year-old, that the polygraph never lies. Lie detector never lies. It has the ability to read your subconscious mind, and that sometimes your subconscious blocks out your memories. But the polygraph knows it never lies. Here's a clip from a presentation I gave to the King County Council Law and Justice Committee in 2017.
Our polygraph expert, Dr. Charles Hauntz, said that the polygraph was used as a psychological rubber hose to beat and coerce Tapp into confessing. I'm going to show you a couple segments from the January 15, 1997 polygraph of Chris Tapp. In this first one, very short, the police officer is telling Tapp that the polygraph is saying he's at the crime with Ben, and Ben goes wacko and starts killing Angie Dodge.
You read this part, see him go wacko here. Start basically killing her. You go whack down and say, whoa, whoa, whoa. You left. I don't know if you came back or not, but you left the room that time. You didn't let him.
10 seconds later, a very emotional Tapp, his voice cracking, asks why he can't remember being at the crime.
Remember, I would remember that. Anyone would.
And then the police officer responds to his question by saying, sometimes your subconscious can block it out.
Your Sometimes your subconscious can lock it in.
That, by the way, is an absurd statement. We remember things that were traumatic. We don't remember things that were untraumatic. Most of us remember where we were when we heard that the 9/11 attacks on New York City. We remember traumatic events. And after he says that, he sums up the polygraph examination by saying, the charts are telling me, Chris, you're telling me, it's saying to me, you were there.
On the chart you're telling is saying to me, you were there.
2 days later, Chris Tapp confesses to going to the scene of the crime with Ben Hobbs.
The CBS show 48 Hours has done a show on the Chris Tapp case. Here's a segment from the show.
Chris Tapp eventually comes to believe that the polygraph is an all-knowing scientific instrument that can read his subconscious and is telling the machine that he was at the crime.
Eventually, the police learn that Ben Hobbs and Chris Tapp don't match the DNA from the crime. They turn on Chris Tapp. They get him to think it's his best interest to say he stabbed Angie Dodge. Here's more from 48 Hours.
Chris finally says, yes, I stabbed her because Ben threatened me. And then Chris said,
Did I do it?
the police officer walks over and says, give me your hand, like he passed the polygraph. And that gets Chris Tapp 30 years to life, charged with the death penalty. Ugly stuff.
The polygraph videos were key to getting Chris Tapp out of prison.
Those polygraph videos, now new evidence, they're the wedge to get Chris in front of a judge to see the coercion that went on.
Oh, don't make him any
The
tighter.
polygraphs are the answer to getting them out.
And that's exactly what happened. This is a photo of myself, Chris Tapp, and our Judges for Justice videographer, one of our videographers, Faraz Orgami, County Courthouse steps on March 22nd, 2017. That was a thrilling moment. You know, that Cool and the Gang song, Celebrate, that's what the music should be here.
A celebration to last throughout the years. Celebrate good times, come on. It's a celebration.
But there were a couple negatives still. The first, in his deal to get out, Chris still came out with a murder conviction, and the real killer was still at large, but both would change. 2 years later, forensic genealogy leads to the identification of Brian Drips as the killer of Angie Dodge. He's had his DNA tested from a cigarette he threw away, cigarette butt. He's a perfect match. He's arrested, and he gives a full confession to murdering Angie Dodge. Turns out, just like the FBI said, he lived across the street. He'd been watching Angie. Here's more from 48 Hours.
In March 2017, Chris Tapp had been released from prison with a murder conviction. But 2 years later, here, let Anne-Marie Green of CBS 48 Hours explain what happened.
2 months after Drips was arrested, Tapp was back in court.
There's clear and convincing evidence the defendant was convicted of a crime for which he did not commit.
This time to be fully exonerated.
The lady to the left of Chris Tapp is Carol Dodge, Angie Dodge's mother. Thanks to her relentless determination to get justice for her daughter, an innocent man was freed after over 20 years in prison, and the real killer was caught. She is a tremendous hero in this case. Now, there are a lot of ups and downs in working on wrongful convictions. Moments like this make it all worthwhile. If you want to see the story about this amazing case, just Google 48 Hours CBS, the twisted case of Angie Dodge. Let's look at our Hawaii case. Now, that's a screenshot of the of a video we created, a 14-part documentary entitled Murder in Hawaii. You can find our film on our website at judgesforjustice.org. Here is a description of the crime. On December 24th, 1991, about 5 p.m., 23-year-old Dana Ireland was riding her bicycle on the Big Island of Hawaii. She was almost to her parents' rental house where the Ireland family was going to have Christmas Eve dinner. A motor vehicle approached her from behind and moved into the left oncoming lane as if to give the cyclist plenty of room. The driver drove past Dana and then stopped in the left oncoming lane. As Dana rode past the stopped vehicle, the driver suddenly accelerated, his tires spinning on the cinder road. He drove into her, crushing the bicycle and dragging her under the vehicle. Shocking. After being run over, Dana is taken to a remote location 5 miles north. We call that crime scene 2. There she's partially disrobed, sexually assaulted, and left to die. She's found by a local woman, still alive, taken to the Hilo Hospital. Dana Ireland dies at 12:25 a.m. Christmas morning, 1991. This is an actual crime scene photo taken at crime scene 2. The blue object is a t-shirt covered in Dana Ireland's blood. It is not her t-shirt. It is the most important evidence in this crime. Within 24 hours, the police had located 3 eyewitnesses at crime scene 1 that saw an older pickup truck. 2 of the witnesses saw a human being being placed into the bed of the truck. That's part of the police report. Another part of the police report, this is 24 hours after the crime. The eyewitness named Carl Smith is certain that he saw the bare leg foot of a human being from knee to toe, and that it was white skin. In our opinion, there's no doubt that the 2 eyewitnesses, Eric Carl Smith and his girlfriend Karina, saw Dana Ireland's killer putting her body into the bed of his pickup. Also, they found matching tire treads, tire marks at both crime scenes, crime scene 1 and crime scene 2. They were 8 inches wide. In our opinion, there's no doubt in these remote locations that was the killer's vehicle. There was a bite mark on the victim's breast. There's no doubt the killer left that bite mark. Vaginal swabs were taken and spermatozoa was found. None of the early evidence led to a suspect. In June 1994, 2.5 years after the crime, a convicted felon, incarcerated felon by the name of Frank Pauline Jr. confessed to being involved in the murder. In his confession, he said he was in the 1957 VW Bug of Albert Ian Schweitzer and his brother Sean Schweitzer. Albert Ian Schweitzer was driving and he ran Dana Ireland over. Then they put Dana Ireland into the trunk of the VW and drove to another location where they killed her. Immediately after the confession, the 3 suspects are arrested and exemplars are taken of their teeth to determine if they made the bite mark. They're examined by a forensic dentist and there is no match. None of the 3 suspects match the bite mark. Also taken into custody was the Schweitzer Volkswagen and the vehicle's tires did not match the 8-inch tires left at the crime scene. In January 96, a year and a half after he confessed, Frank Pauline recanted his confession. He said he'd lied to get into protective custody and get his brother off of a drug charge. It continued to get worse for the prosecution. In 1999, a DNA expert report, we learned that the 3 suspects were not a match to the sperm left at the crime scene. To get around the 3 suspects not matching the DNA, we think there might be a 4th attacker involved. 8 years later, by the way, after the crime. Back to the FBI, always a single perpetrator crime, this kind of. To explain away the lack of the DNA, they came up with a 4th suspect. But remember the t-shirt covered in Dana Ireland's blood. There's no doubt the killer wore that t-shirt. At Frank Pauline's trial, 3 witnesses said the bloody t-shirt belonged to Frank Pauline. Eight years after the murder of Dana Ireland, Frank Pauline is found guilty. August 27, 1999, the jury arrived at their verdict. The jury found Frank Raymond Pauline Jr. guilty on all counts.
We, the jury in this case, find the defendant guilty of the offense of murder in the 2nd degree.
Up next was Albert Ian Schweitzer. The same 3 witnesses testified that the bloody t-shirt at crime scene 2 belonged to Frank Pauline. And it was the same result. Schweitzer was found guilty, sentenced to 130 years in prison. Even though Frank Pauline had recanted his confession, the 3 witnesses had said that that was Pauline's t-shirt found next to Dana Ireland. If that was his t-shirt, that means he was at the crime and his confession was true. If Pauline's confession is true, Pauline and the Schweitzer brothers are guilty. Two months after his brothers found guilty by a jury, Sean Schweitzer appears in court. He cut a plea deal. He pled guilty to reduced charges, and he gave a full confession. In his confession, Sean said he saw his brother run over Dana Ireland and then saw Frank Pauline sexually assaulted. After he pled guilty and confessed, the judge released him from jail. But a collective sigh of relief swept over Hawaii. Finally, justice had been done. Actually, justice had not been done. What you're looking at is a brief summary of DNA findings. In 2007, a DNA test of the bloody t-shirt determined that the t-shirt did not belong to Frank Pauline. Oh, by the way, it belongs to the guy who left the scene. That means that the critical evidence presented by the prosecution in both trials was false. It's hard to imagine, but things get even worse for Pauline. The ultimate insult. In 2015, he is murdered in prison.
It's one of the state's most notorious and heinous crimes. A young woman brutally raped and murdered on the Big Island. And now, just as we're learning the case is being revisited, one of the men convicted of the crime is killed in prison today.
So iniquity is defined as gross injustice. There are a series of injustices in the Hawaii case. Dana Ireland, of course, was brutally murdered. 3 innocent men are wrongfully convicted of the crime. The case was closed. No one was looking for the killer. exonerating DNA evidence was hidden from Frank Pauline in 2007. Frank Pauline is murdered in prison, never able to use the exonerating DNA evidence to clear his name. A killer still walks the land, unpursued, free to kill again. This is Hawaii iniquity. So what does Judges for Justice to do to help rectify the wrongful conviction? The simplest way to describe what Judges for Justice do is to say, we educate, we teach the impacted community. We reverse the disease process of an injustice with education. We create films telling the truth. We get people to watch the films by advertising them. Once good people learn of an injustice, they will not tolerate it. This is a full-page ad we're currently running in this month's Hawaii Bar Journal. You can see we've created a film, 14-part documentary called Murder in Hawaii. We are advertising the film, like in the Bar Journal here, to get people to watch the video. We learned a lot from the civil rights movement. Oh, by the way, that all our advertising, like that Bar Journal ad, the writing is done by Carol Glickfeld, who's a member of Endless Opportunities. And the reason I'm here, I think she recommended me. So anyway, she's an amazing writer. In his 1963 letter from the Birmingham jail, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. said, quote, "Just as Socrates felt it necessary to create a tension in the mind, so must we see the need for nonviolent gadflies to create the kind of tension in society that will help men rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding and brotherhood." Judges for Justice is a nonviolent gadfly. We are trying to create the kind of tension in society that will change the court of public opinion through education. Dr. King also said in that letter, quote, "My friends, I must say to you, we have not made a single gain in civil rights without determined legal and non-violent pressure." Dr. King knew that you can have the law on your side in an obvious unjust situation, but there's no change in the status quo unless you employ non-violent pressure. You need to create the tension in society that challenges the prevailing mindset. This is a famous picture, 1963, Birmingham. It's part of the Children's Crusade. A police dog attacking a black kid dressed in a Sunday best. Pictures like this and films of the fire hose mowing down these young kids went around the world. The power of film to present truth and change minds is undeniable. So we saw the most effective way for Judges for Justice to create tension, to educate, was to make what we call innocence videos about the case. This is our first one. It's in Idaho. This is a screenshot, September 2015. That's the Idaho Falls, where the city got its name, and it's the Mormon temple in the background. In total, we made 3 innocence videos on the Idaho case. They received over 10,000 views on YouTube. We held 2 public meetings. We got great press coverage. We advertised our videos in the newspaper and on Facebook. The local paper, the Post-Register, just picked up on our cues and did some awesome stuff. There's a editorial where they say, "Free tap now." The prevailing mindset of the community when Judges for Justice first entered in 2013 was Chris Tapp is a cold-blooded killer. Lucky he didn't get the death penalty. By educating, by creating tension in society and applying nonviolent pressure, in other words, being gadflies, we were changing the court of public opinion. A couple years after we were there, the mindset was Chris Tapp is an innocent man, wrongfully convicted. It's hard to see that picture there, but on September 22nd, 2016, there was a key hearing at the Bonneville County Courthouse. That picture has 5 people holding free Chris Tapp signs. Because of our Judges for Justice work, a grassroots organization had emerged. This was 5 of them, and they are in front of the courthouse just before the hearing. In total, there were 10 local citizens that were marching around the courthouse that day. When the judge and prosecutor drove in that morning, they saw the protesters. When the judge walked into the courtroom, it was jam-packed. The national media was filming from the jury box. We were breaking through the tunnel vision of the judge. That was key. Once a person is no longer blinded by his or her tunnel vision, anybody can see that this person is innocent. 3 months later, the judge ruled for the first time ever in Tapp's favor. 3 months after that, Tapp was free. Picture of Carol Dodge and Chris Tapp. Now, what did we do in the Hawaii case? This is a screenshot of our first innocence video in 2018. It was entitled, Who Killed Dana Ireland? Justice for Dana, Part 1. The YouTube views of this video now number about 22,000. We look at the number of YouTube views because it gives us a gauge that indicates how many people are getting our message of innocence. This is a screenshot of another YouTube video, our second innocence video in the Hawaii case. It's called Episode 11, Catching the Killer. Episode 11 now has over 36,000 views, 99% of them from Hawaii. Here's another one of our bar ads that Carol wrote. And we ran it to encourage the viewing of episode 11. It got a quote from Judge Woolard on there, who's joining us by Zoom. She said that the video was, quote, stunning, compelling, and spot on. This is, I think, some of the most effective stuff we've done. This week, because we're a nonprofit, we can mail at nonprofit rates. In October of 2020, we sent this postcard 6 by 11 to over 29,000 households on the Big Island. The front says, Dana's killer is still out there. The back gives more detail and asks the recipient to watch episode 11. The advantage of a postcard, it stays inside the house and it doesn't get discarded until the person throws it away. In our Ohio case, we sent out about 40,000 of these postcards into the Toledo area. And in 2021, we sent another postcard, double the amount, into Oahu and on the Big Island. We estimate our postcards were read by over 100,000 Hawaii residents. If you are a Facebook user on the Big Island, you probably saw this ad. All told, we have generated about 100,000 views of our innocence videos in Hawaii. Good things are happening in Hawaii. Okay, we're going to briefly wrap up. We're going to take a quick look at our Pennsylvania case. It's our next case. It begins with a shocking crime. December 15th, 1994, a young mother, Joanne Katranak, and her 3-month-old son, Alex, went missing. The disappearance was daily news in Eastern PA.
Now the mystery is in the hands of state police and the FBI. Did someone abduct the mother and child? Did they run away? So far, there's no answers.
4 months after they disappeared, the bodies of Joanne and Alex were found in a patch of woods. Ugly photo, isn't it? Eventually, Patty Rorrer became the chief suspect. Back in the late 1980s, she had been the live-in girlfriend of Andy Katranak, the husband of the victim. 8 days before the disappearance, Patty Rorrer called the Katranak residence from her home in North Carolina and asked to speak to Andy. Joanne answered the phone and told Patty off. Quit calling. Andy's married. We have a 3-month-old baby. F off. This rebuke, according to the prosecution, was why Patty Rorrer would drive 500 miles each way, undetected, and kill Joanne Katranak and her baby. When you take apart this case, when you distill it down, there's really only one piece of probative evidence, admittedly a very good piece of probative evidence. That being, 2 of the crime scene hairs were discovered in July 1997 to have a hair root on them. Now, to get nuclear DNA from a hair, it must have a root. So take a look at this timeline. In December 94, 6 of the crime scene hairs were found in the victim's car. Although the hairs were microscopically examined by at least 2 lab scientists in 1995, no one observed a root until July of 1997, 2.5 years after the crime. Note the date, October 13th, in our timeline, 1995. It says 3 Q1 hairs returned by the FBI to the Pennsylvania State Police Lab. This is page 2 of the October 13th, 95 report from the FBI back to the PSP lab. You look at the bottom paragraph, it reads, the submitted items, that means the hairs, and probed membranes are being returned to your office under separate cover by registered mail. The entire prosecution case against Patty Rorrer rests on the belief that the FBI lab is in error, that the FBI actually never returned those hairs, that they kept them at the FBI lab. For me, that contention is hard to believe. And it gets even harder to believe when we learn, pursuant to a Freedom of Information Act report in 2014, the FBI, this is an FBI report that surfaced. The report notes that 3 hairs 9 inches long are presently at the FBI lab for DNA analysis and had, quote, no roots attached. I recently spoke with the FBI agent who wrote that report. He told me the date of the report was November 30th, 1995. He said at the time, he and other police officers were just learning about DNA and had just learned that to get DNA from a hair, you needed a root. He said he was in almost daily contact with the PSP troopers investigating the case. He said he learned from the troopers that the PSP lab scientists had determined there were no roots on the crime scene hairs. back to our timeline. Big questions surrounding this case. This is the only evidence against Patty Rorrer. See the October 13th, 1995 return of the Q1 hairs to the PSP lab from the FBI. If that's true, how did the hairs get back to the FBI to be seen to have a root on them back in 97? Well, the only answer is they must have been mistaken. If FBI agent is correct that in 1995, the PSP lab had determined there were no roots attached, how did roots get on them in 1997? Another question, and the answer lies in television. Why were 3 pieces of promising evidence never tested for DNA? Example, at the crime scene in the patch of woods, a cigarette butt is found. Patty Rorrer and Joanne Katrinak did not smoke, but that cigarette butt has never been tested for DNA. It's an ugly photo of a torn off fingernail. Probably by its size and grooming, it's a male. That fingernail was found on the victim's chest. Fingernails and hair they contain mitochondrial DNA, which is from the mother. It's passed down from the mother to the child. It is not as definitive as nuclear DNA, but it's still a powerful tool for identification. Despite the potential value of this fingernail, it has never been tested for mitochondrial DNA. In Joanne Katrinak's right hand, see that paragraph 18, there was a strand of human hair found in the victim's right hand. It did not belong to Patty Rorrer or Joanne Katrinak. This is a photo of the hair found in the victim's right hand. Could belong to the killer, or at least one of the killers, yet it has never been tested for mitochondrial DNA. In this video segment, NBC reporter Keith Morrison asked the prosecutor, Mike McIntyre, why wasn't the hair tested?
Why wasn't it tested?
Why wasn't it tested? It was looked at, and it was already determined that it wasn't Joanne's and it wasn't Patricia's.
The fact that law enforcement, the police, and prosecutors feel it is unnecessary to DNA test a cigarette butt, a torn off fingernail found on the victim's chest, or test a hair in the hand of the victim is mind-boggling. It is also rock solid proof of tunnel vision. Remember, in tunnel vision, when we're locked in, we accept evidence no matter how flimsy, and we reject evidence no matter how probative. Law enforcement wants us to believe they are fair and conducted a thorough investigation. This failure to test crime scene evidence is proof that they are unfair and their investigation is half-assed. The cigarette butt found at the crime scene, the fingernail found on the victim's chest, and the hair in the right hand, obviously, all should be tested for mitochondrial DNA. We believe it will match one single person. We believe that it's a male. If so, powerful evidence of Patty Rorrer's innocence. There's much more evidence in the Patty Rorrer's case, but we don't have time to discuss it today. We are working on an innocence video about the problems with this case, the shocking crime, the police tunnel vision, and the noble cause corruption. This case happened in Lehigh County, about an hour north of Philadelphia. This is much more populous area than Idaho or our Hawaii case. That means the Facebook ads like this one, but about the Patty Rorrer case, will be more expensive to run. Means bar journal advertising, newspaper advertising will be more expensive to run. We will need to mail similar postcards into Leon County. It'll cost us a lot more money. We're going to need more funding, but as the 23rd Psalm says, promises, our shepherd will provide. We shall not want. Please consider joining our Judges for Justice Bucket Brigade. On our website at the top is a tab called Donate. This is the hardest part of this presentation for me. We are a 501c3 organization. Your contribution is tax deductible. Or if you know of a charitable foundation that might support us, let us know and we'll go give them a pitch for support. In the Bible's book of Amos, the prophet tells the house of Israel, do not be smug and satisfied with your houses of hewn stone. Do not oppress the poor, but instead hate evil, love good, establish justice. Let justice roll down like water and righteousness flow like a mighty stream. God, I get chills just hearing those words. I am going to play a movie about a clip about justice. It's from the movie Philadelphia, starring Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington. Tom Hanks plays a lawyer that has been discriminated against for being gay.
All right. Are you a good lawyer, Andrew?
I'm an excellent lawyer.
What makes you an excellent lawyer?
I love the law. I know the law. I excel at practicing.
What do you love about the law, Andrew?
Many things. What I love the most about the law?
Yes.
Is that every now and again, not often, but occasionally, you get to be a part of justice being done. That really is quite a thrill when that happens.
I can attest, it's quite a thrill when that happens, when justice is being done. You too can be a part of justice being done. Please consider joining our Bucket Brigade. You can click on that QR code and go to our website. I can't tell you how much it's been a distinct honor for me to share Judges for Justice and our work with endless opportunities today. Toda Rabah for listening. Thank you so much.